If you can see yourself in the bottom right corner, Ariel can see you.
She can see my leg anyway.
Well, do we need to move it?
Oh, I don't know if she wants to see me or not. I don't know if she can.
She does. That's what she's.
Oh,
That's
okay.
why she's here.
Right, she doesn't want to just see my legs. Okay. I think I'm going to take off my glasses and see how that goes. My eyeballs are sweating. Rattling a stick. Off and on for several years, I received email invitations to readings of a group of rhyming poets. I'd say the poets were Longfellowish, but let's remember Longfellow translated 12th century Persian Sufi poet Hafiz. And though Longfellow may not be my cup of free-range dandelion tea, he had his brilliance and certainly resilience. To these email invitations to join rhyming poets, I responded, please unsubscribe. The invitations would stop, only to recommence after a spell. I stepped up my pitch. Thanks, but please take me off your mailing list, and I'm not interested, and I don't write rhyming poetry. But you don't have to be a rhyming poet to come, was the seemingly generous but really artlessly pig-headed response. But I'm not interested. But you don't have to be a rhyming poet to come. Beckett, Mamet, what conversation. The thrum, which was more like the cycle of a dryer with one tennis shoe banging against its wet metal drum, than the lovely cyclic melding of spring into summer, summer into fall, and so on, had its own resilience. Finally, I bared my fangs. Stop sending me these fucking emails. My life can be constructed and certainly deconstructed as a timeline of shame. You don't know what poetry is, the champion of rhyme shot back, and added what he assumed to be another devastating blow. You're a snob. Don't know poetry? Snob? What a tragic twist that at long last I find someone who knows me to the core, but I don't ever want to meet them. For I don't know what poetry is. Yes, I could reiterate definitions we all know. My current favorite from Naeem Moore's wonderfully funny essay, My Poets on Poetry Foundation website, my quote. And for a moment, I feel as if the top of my head has come off, immediately followed by the rather unpleasant sensation that someone is rattling a stick around in there. As for you're a snob, I'd not long ago stated that very insight in my nature to poet Tim Trace Peterson. Peterson canted his head, cast his wise eyes to our shared lunch of bulgogi and kimchi and said, it's probably good for your poetry. So I invite you to the Snobbery School of Poetry. At this point, my work here could be done. Each of you knows in your heart you're smarter than I am, more talented, more out, or in the case of this audience, more straight and more hipster than I am. That your line breaks could break my lines into insignificance, consumed by first-century winds off the Sinai Desert. That your Laconian, Duridian, Ron Silliman-loving selves leaves me in the dust of my insignificance. Since Silliman is alive and well, may I say I wasn't aware of him until about 5 years ago, and realized the level of contempt for various poets he has inspired is a reflection of the soured human spirit and not his intention. After all, the first inquisitors were Franciscans, not long after St. Francis's death. Hard to believe that Francis would have held his hand out to brother torturer. And another sidebar about language poetry. In Marjorie Perloff's now oft-quoted Boston Review screed against the Rita Dove Penguin Anthology of Contemporary American Poetry, Perloff's snobbery reveals something about language poetry. And her essay is Poetry on the Brink, and I quote, by the late 90s, when language poetry felt compelled to be more inclusive with respect to gender, race, and ethnic diversity, it became difficult to tell what was or was not a language poem. In other words, language poetry is a poetry of white men. Add in women, add in non-whites, and it isn't language poetry. To that I say amen. To that I say, why defend language poetry? To that I say, snobbery works against us too. As to my insignificance, I can live with it. My thought on poetry, if you don't write poetry, I'm being a little preachy here. If you don't write poetry to change the world or connect with supreme deities which change us so we can change the world, you are not writing poetry. Herein my snobbery. If you are queer and writing poetry and not trying to change the world, you are in trouble. If you are of color and writing poetry and not trying to change the world, you are in trouble. If you are white and writing poetry and not trying to change the world, you are the devil. I can't ask you to share my theological beliefs, which are Swedenborgian and of Hafiz, Sufis, Spinoza, but I do call on poets to move our little inch of cosmos towards a more civil, kinder world, and one where no one, including those silly and sometimes rough queer teenagers I see outside the center, and their peers around the country don't become casualties of hate. And by that I meant outside the gay lesbian center on 13th, and there's always or often a group of teenagers who are so dear and so much at risk, and a lot of transgenders, kids, and to worry about them. You want theory? Let's go for that chestnut of Socrates, that when people know the good, they will do the good. So in that sense, we can help show what is good, show compassion towards each other and give to the poor, as opposed to deny 250,000 children lunches, which is what Congress is currently trying to do. To some extent, that's relative and personal, dependent on nation and culture. I know of no heartfelt religion or worthy state that teaches hate. It's a choice. If, back in 2006, someone was confused about Obama's citizenship, well, okay, I can tolerate that. Set them straight and move on. When the question arises in 2012, it is manipulative and willfully ignorant. Willful ignorance is the anti-good. It is sleep. My favorite graffiti in New York dates back to the Bush 2 era, and I see it when I walk up Lex. Wake the fuck up. I suggest our deliciously sluggish movement towards the good through snobbery should be quickly. Easy breezy for us, right? I mean, snobbery is no foreigner to the world of gay, lesbian, transgender, regendered, overly gendered, bisexual, twosexual, monosexual, dykes, gays, bisexual human beings, or queer, or straight people who, in being human, achieve a conundrum of whim, desire, urge, definition, self-definition, redefinition. And that if there is, a resurgence of animosity or condescension, first world, in the academy, and out of the academy, among our kind, and I originally was talking about Caribbean, and elsewhere towards women, and that it is ugly. I experience it, I see it, I hear about it from women of all races, and I see it among queers. To be a member of the snobbery school of poetry, you have to know yourself, not so much as urged by someone or other in Greece long ago, to move toward the ever-elusive, move towards the ever-elusive good, and both self-knowledge and a life of kindness or lifetime ventures and incredibly difficult, at least for me. God, I sound like I just walked out of my Protestant Sunday school. Finally, my manifesto doesn't have much of an effect on style of poetry, because I believe it has to come out of who we are. We can't become Elizabeth Bishop or Langston Hughes or Sappho or Cavafy. We can't turn ourselves into classic. We can only do our best. It is an irritating and enormously humbling fact. I believe many poets shrink from the pain of that humility, from the shame or supposed shame of not being among the greats, by championing specific schools of poetry. This isn't a veiled comment on anyone. If we do try to write according to the dictates of realism or language poetry or romanticism, we won't do our best. If we're not at our best, which is always personal and relative, we can't affect the world. Do I have any time left? Okay, so I'm just going to read 2 poems. That's it. I'm just going to read 2 poems.